Today, we're going to talk about Trump's announcement to run for president and the way that it backfired pretty badly on him. And I have two interviews this week. I interviewed Senator Gary Peters, who led the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee through a hugely successful midterm cycle where Democrats are actually poised to expand their Senate majority, about what worked compared to previous cycles, and what the plan is for the more difficult Senate map in 2024. And I'm joined by former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner to discuss the appointment of a special counsel to investigate Trump, whether it means an indictment is more likely, and what it means if Trump holds true to his threats not to participate. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So as expected, Donald Trump has announced that he'll be running for president in 2024. That part wasn't too surprising. I don't think any of us didn't expect that was going to happen. But here's what was pretty surprising: the way that it was received by everyone, but especially by the right. So first of all, Fox News literally cut away from the speech, which, just think about that. This is the former president of the United States, the leader of the Republican Party, the guy who Fox News basically staked its entire survival on, making his presidential announcement, a move that should be historic, and Fox didn't even carry the whole thing. And I think there are two reasons here. First, it was boring. Just from a purely entertainment standpoint, Trump droned on about immigrants and drugs and the usual nihilistic hellishness that was cooked up in Stephen Miller's mind. He congratulated himself on his accomplishments and pretended he did a lot more stuff than he actually did. If you've watched any of Trump's hundreds of rallies that he's done, you've heard this speech before. And so just in terms of the incentive to let it play for these networks, including Fox, regardless of his historical significance, it was just boring. And I think that it shows for the same reason that Trump succeeded in 2016, which was because he was rude and cruel and flashy and brass, which, by the way, is who he's always been. That was new in politics, and so people wanted to watch. But in the same way that that was always Trump, it remains Trump now. He didn't adapt. He didn't change. And so we've already seen it. It's boring. It's like season 1 of that show that was exciting and new, and now we're in season 6, and the plot is identical. People stopped watching. And considering the only thing that Trump had going for him was how exciting he was to watch, whether you loved him or hated him, the fact that he is boring now is just outright kryptonite to him. So that's one reason that it wasn't received with all the pomp and circumstance that Trump had hoped for. But the other reason is that I think we all know why he announced. And it wasn't from a position of strength. He wasn't responding to the will of the people. He was doing it from a position of weakness. He was doing it because he thinks that he can use this announcement as cover against all the investigations that are bearing down on him right now. And so he'll announce early, like he just did, and then when these probes that are already ongoing continue to progress, he'll be able to say, the only reason that I'm being investigated right now is because I'm running for president and the evil communist Democrats want to help Joe Biden. Now, of course, that's why Merrick Garland immediately appointed a special counsel, someone who's not a Biden appointee, but that's not going to stop Trump from using this talking point anyway. Now, aside from the legal stuff, he's also doing it to try to wrestle some of the attention away from Ron DeSantis, who's basically become the heir apparent of the Republican Party. Here's a little bit of what we've heard from Republicans as far as Ron DeSantis is concerned.
Certainly would not turn my back on President Trump. I am a huge supporter of his. But with that, I love Governor Ron DeSantis. He is America's governor, and he has these same policies.
Do you see the former president a need for him to go to Georgia?
I think we've got to make strategic calculations. Governor DeSantis, I think he should be welcome to the state, given what happened last night. You got to look at the realities on the ground. And Herschel Walker, we've got to win the Senate. That's it, guys. Got to win the Senate.
So not great if you're Trump and your whole shtick is that you command complete loyalty from the GOP. But the point more broadly is that Trump is losing his grip on the party. People in that party for the first time are feeling comfortable abandoning him in public, which they've never been able to do. And they recognize that his utility is shrinking. And the irony here is that everything Trump does is transactional. He'll use people until they're no longer useful and then discard them immediately. And now, knowing that he's not some electoral juggernaut, knowing that his endorsed candidates were a bunch of losers in midterms, knowing that he himself is turning people away from the GOP, Republicans are finally recognizing that the person who's lost his usefulness here is Donald Trump. And so now he's being discarded in the same way that he spent years discarding everyone else. And there's just some poetic justice in that. So again, he didn't announce because he had some grand mandate to announce. He announced yet again to try and save his own ass and because he's insecure about someone else getting all the attention. And not only was that evident in his speech, it was evident in everyone else's reaction to his speech. One more point that I wanted to make here, and that is about covering him as we head into 2024 and learning from our mistakes in the past. So first off, I do think that the media more broadly recognized its role in elevating Trump back in 2016, the hours of broadcasting empty podiums waiting for his arrival, the years of transcribing his bullshit claims without any context. I do honestly believe that there's going to be a lot more correcting for that. Already when Trump announced, PBS wrote, "Breaking: Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 presidential election and who inspired a deadly riot at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power, has filed to run for president again in 2024. I saw similar headlines from other outlets. I think there's going to be a lot less hanging on his every word, not just to course correct from 2016, but also for the reason that I gave earlier. It's just generally boring now. There's only so much that some deranged lunatic yelling about windmills is going to garner attention. Yeah, it was exciting a few years back, but now it's just tired." So I covered the Trump speech, and I wrestled a lot about whether or not to do it, and ultimately this is what I came up with. I think that at this moment, knowing why he was announcing and having just watched his entire slate of gubernatorial candidates and Secretary of State candidates lose in the midterms, making sure that people know that Trump remains the face of the GOP isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, we've got runoffs in Georgia coming up. If Trump wants to remind the voters who just repudiated him that he remains the head of that party, then be my guest. He endorsed Herschel Walker, and then Raphael Warnock immediately cut a campaign ad of Trump endorsing Herschel Walker, just using his exact words. If that's not a testament to just how much of an albatross around Republicans' necks Trump is, then nothing is. So I think in this instance, knowing that Trump is actually doing himself and his party more harm than good by announcing, I think it was worth it to show this speech. With that said, I also think that there will be relatively little coverage of him and his campaign and his rallies moving forward. I don't intend to cover them. I did little to no coverage of them over the last couple of years. I think at the end of the day, that he does want attention. And so aside from particular moments, like whether it's for investigations or indictments or whatever, I don't intend on giving him the exact thing that he's looking for. Here's a clip from my interview with Glenn Kirshner. Does this signal an investigation that's moving toward indictment? And I ask that because if Merrick Garland had no intention of indicting, I'd imagine the guy would simply say that he won't indict as opposed to the whole to-do that is appointing a special counsel.
Brian, as frustrating as it felt to hear the announcement yesterday from Merrick Garland that now another special counsel is being appointed, I actually think it could end up being a good thing. Had Merrick Garland decided that no charges should be brought against Donald Trump for either the Mar-a-Lago classified documents crimes or the January 6th insurrection, he simply could have made that decision himself. The fact that he appointed a special counsel and has now entirely turned over both of those investigations to the special counsel, Jack Smith, you really can't read that any other way than it is a step in the direction of Donald Trump possibly being criminally indicted.
Now, is there something to be said for the fact that this guy prosecuted war crimes at The Hague? Like, he doesn't seem like your run-of-the-mill call 1-888 accidents prosecutor here. Like, what do you know about Jack Smith?
So I have been talking with my friends and colleagues, people that worked with and for Jack Smith. I'm trying to do my homework before I sort of start to talk about what those perceptions are. Here's the thing. Not only was Jack Smith a war crimes prosecutor at The Hague, he was also in charge of the Department of Justice Public Integrity Section, what they call the PIN. And during his tenure there, he authorized and was involved in some pretty consequential prosecutions. The prosecution of Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, the prosecution of the governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell. Now, one Democrat, one Republican, both really challenging cases, not just because of the atmospherics that it was the Department of Justice going after high government or high elected officials, but these were really challenging cases on the facts, on the merits. The reason I say that is the Menendez prosecution ended in an acquittal, a not guilty verdict. And here's the thing, Brian, give me a prosecutor any day who is willing to take a really challenging, high-profile, politically charged case to trial and lose it. That is not some sort of failing. That's not an embarrassment. In my book, that's a badge of merit. Why? Because he was willing to take difficult cases to trial. Now, he took the Governor McDonnell case to trial, he won a conviction, but it was reversed on appeal, again, because it was fraught with lots of challenging legal issues. But those things are not failures. In my book, those are successes. It's a sign that he was willing to take a risk, to do the hard work of bringing really difficult cases against high government officials, elected officials who violated the law. Give me that kind of a prosecutor on my team any day of the week.
And here's a clip from my interview with Senator Gary Peters. This was an election cycle where it's very clear that Republican extremism was rejected at the ballot box. And yet we had people like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, who you may remember for having objected to the electors on January 6th. They came out and gave a bunch of excuses as to why Republicans lost. And miraculously, none of them included any reference to the same Republican extremism that they themselves espouse. So what's your response to these Republicans like Cruz and Hawley?
Well, clearly they're out of touch with where the American people are. And that's why I was just so proud of what happened in this election, that people clearly rejected very extreme candidates. And, that was probably the best strength we had going into this election, was that the contrast between Democrats running, whether they were an incumbent or a challenger, and their Republican opponent was very extreme. One, certainly saving democracy was very clear when you had so many election deniers, or election liars, really is what they are, there, that people said, enough of that. And then you looked at the other major issue that drove so much of our turnout, which was the abortion issue. And after the Dobbs decision, there's no question that women in particular, but all of us, realized that a fundamental right was being taken away after over a half a century of precedent. That motivated people. And then you look at the Republican candidates who are extreme on the issue. They believe no exception for rape, for incest, for the health of the mom, some cases, the life of the mom. That's not where the American people are. And folks said, we're not gonna stand up for that, and we're gonna get out and vote and make a difference. And if I may take a little more time on this question here, what really inspired me in particular on that issue is what we saw in Michigan. Michigan did extremely well in this election. And it was young people in particular that really turned out in huge numbers. The abortion issue was huge for them, women in particular. And as an example, at Michigan State University and the University of Michigan on election day, we have same-day registration. Students showed up to register and to vote, a little more time-consuming process. But at 8 p.m., when the polls closed, anybody who was in line could still vote. And the last student at the University of Michigan to vote was 2 a.m. They stayed in line for hours to make sure that their voice was heard. That gives me great hope for our democracy.
To watch both of these interviews with Gary Peters and Glenn Kirshner, click the thumbnails right here on the screen, or you can find them on my YouTube channel. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.